Welcome to the 13th annual Ariel Avrech Yahrzeit Lecture. Thank you all for joining us today. Since this event is being taped, please silence your phones. And please sign our guest book, which is out front on the table, something that Karen and I cherish. Planning this lecture is a big job and cannot be done without the singular Rebecca Jalali. She is always by my side in planning this event, but this year her service is even more remarkable considering the monumental task in moving the young Israel Century City into temporary and multiple sites. For those who don't know, I'm Robert Avrech. I'm Ariel's father, and this is Karen, my wife, Ariel's mother. We also wish to thank Rabbi Abraham Lieberman, who made the Young Eula Girls School available to us. He did it last minute. During Ariel's long illness, there was one man who always sat by Ariel's side, a man who could always be counted on for spiritual support and common sense advice. Rabbi Elazar Muskin is not just a friend of the Avrech family, but a pillar of our lives here in Los Angeles. Ariel was proud to call Rabbi Muskin his Rebbe. Ariel, alav hashalom, was only 13 years old when he urged us to skip him from 7th grade into high school, Yeshiva Gedola. We'd always encouraged Ariel's precocious interests, no matter if they differed from our own plan, as we always felt that Ariel was special. Unfortunately, Ariel only enjoyed 7 months of fulfilling his dream. In the spring of 1995, in his freshman year of high school, Ariel was diagnosed with a brain tumor. But to our amazement, Ariel didn't allow this shattering event to block his scholarly path. He maintained his learning through the kind visits of his friends from yeshiva, was valedictorian of his high school class, and despite some setbacks, was able to study at Yeshiva Neve Yisrael in Baltimore for 3 years. To our shock and dismay, the massive chemotherapy that saved him ultimately led to a catastrophic diagnosis that could only be treated by a lung transplant. Time ran out before Ariel could be saved. Karen and I constantly struggle with recapturing the essence of Ariel. In defense against the pain, many details are hazy or so sharp that they are effervescent, igniting our hearts for only a bearable instant. We have found that the best way to remember Ariel is to quote his words and retell stories that reveal his unique character. One of these moments occurred at his 12th birthday party. A trip with all his friends to a local deli, a stop at a comic book store, winding up with a screening of one of his favorite videos, Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles. At the end, we interviewed the boys for a video. At first, in typical shy manner, Ariel hesitated and said very little. Then, after all his friends spoke, and he had gathered his thoughts, he said, "I'm glad that my friends are here now, and I hope that we will still be friends in 25 years. Friendship is eternal. Friendship is a wonderful thing. I could write a whole book about how great it is." Ariel loved being with his friends, and so a gathering like this is exquisitely attuned to his gentle soul. One dear friend, Michael Weiner, Ariel's friend since childhood in Hillel Hebrew Academy, will introduce the morning's events with a remembrance of Ariel. The morning program will proceed as follows. After Michael, Ben Shapiro will deliver the Ariel Avrech Yahrzeit Lecture, followed by a question and answer period. Ariel's close friend from high school, Rabbi Avi Stewart, will say Kel Malei Rachamim, after which I will recite the Kaddish, and then you are all invited to brunch. I am honored to turn the podium over to Ariel's dear friend, Michael Weiner.
I really want to thank Robert and Karen for giving me this opportunity to just share some of my memories and some of my stories of Ariel. And in preparing to make these remarks, it really gave me a good opportunity to really drill down and think about some of the memories I have of Ariel and exactly what he meant to me and continues to mean to me. So as Robert mentioned, Yik is currently in multiple locations. renovations, and on the first Shabbos after their move, I was walking through Hillel Hebrew Academy, and I was walking in the, I guess, overpass bridge in between the, I guess, not so new building now and the old building, and you can see onto the Hillel playground from there, and I stopped for a minute, and it brought back so many memories, and I think that due to the timing, I knew I was going to be giving this speech in a few weeks. I think it probably would have been the case anyways. Just so many of those memories involved Ariel, just us, as kids running from class onto the playground for recess. Shirts probably untucked. Though Ariel's usually was tucked in, more so than others. And either playing handball or just hanging out by the tables and chatting. The other thing that we did every morning in the Hillel playground was we'd have a lineup before class, and they'd recite the Pledge of Allegiance and say "Atikva." And there was one particular morning. This was the day after Ariel and I guess you guys had all returned from your trip to New York for the filming of A Stranger Among Us. And I remember we're standing at the, lineup area, and Ariel comes running over, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I met Michael J. Fox." And this was, I don't remember exactly what year, but when, Michael J. Fox was obviously really huge. And he told us how he had met him in New York, and then, he introduced himself, and they chatted for a little bit, and then a little bit later on the trip, he saw him again, and Michael J. Fox remembered him. He also then told us about his role in the movie, which was pretty small, I think. It was that a camera passes over his face. But he told us about being on the set and just how exciting it was. I think there was maybe also some talk of Robert being, once the movie was released, of Robert being nominated for an Oscar or something, because Robert had told Ariel that Ariel would be able to deliver the acceptance speech. And in typical Ariel fashion, by the time he told his friends of this story, he had already written the acceptance speech. And it started off with the line, "Wow, I can't believe I'm at the Oscars." And he proceeded to thank the Academy and say lots of other things that most kids in elementary school would not think to say. The other area where we really had a lot of fun, where we have a lot of memories, was at the Avrech house. I will always associate the word Cardiff with the Avrech house, with thoughts of, yes, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie Sneakers, which I remember we watched. I don't know if we're supposed to be watching it or not, but we did. And of Ariel, I can just picture him standing in the living room showing me how this thing called a Laserdisc player worked. Most people probably don't know what that is, but I guess you can look it up. It had its 15 minutes of fame. But Ariel was also, even from the earliest of ages, he was just the most dedicated friend. He's the only person I can remember who, when he would go over to someone else's house to play, would bring some of his own toys that he thought that person might want to play with. There was the time when, and I know my father will remember this, when we walked to a friend's bar mitzvah in Hancock Park, and this was in August, and Ariel walked the whole way, both ways, wearing his suit and tie and black hat. It was a nice contrast. My father was wearing his straw hat, and Ariel was wearing his black hat. And I think in conclusion, I just want to tell one story that I think really sums up exactly who Ariel was and what he still means to me and to all the people who were blessed to be able to call him their friend. So in our class in Hillel, as I would imagine in most elementary school classes, there were some kids who, got picked on. And in particular, there was one more than others. I can picture the day exactly where it was, also in the Hillel playground towards the tables, almost right underneath the overpass, when Ariel told a bunch of our classmates, he said, "Look, that is just wrong. It is not right. I'm not going to do it. I obviously can't stop you guys from doing it, but I'm not going to do it." And to think about a kid of, I don't know exactly how old we were at the time, but, couldn't have been more than, 10 or 11, having the courage and the fortitude to take a position like that at that age is incredibly inspiring, and it continues to inspire me to this day, and is just one of the things or one of the pieces of Ariel that I will always have with me for the rest of my life. I know that. So I really, like I said, want to thank you for the opportunity to share a few memories. May Ariel's neshama have an aliyah, and I hope that we all just continue to take the lessons and values that he embodied and use them in our own lives. Thank you very much.
I didn't know about Yosef's. Unable, because of his illness, to continue his studies at Ner Yisrael in Baltimore, Ariel came home but continued to study with friends and by himself. But in the long hours at home, as I sat and worked on one screenplay or another, I frequently listened to talk radio. Dennis Prager, Michael Medved, Larry Elder, all these men have spoken at this lecture series. Ariel started to listen with me, and he was intrigued by the insightful political and cultural conversations that took place, often focusing on religious topics. A whole new world of thought was opening up to Ariel. Sadly, Ariel never heard Ben Shapiro, but as Ben emerged on the local and national scene, a frum Jew, an eloquent defender of the Constitution, and a fierce partisan for Israel, Karen and I knew that Ariel would just adore Ben's off-the-chart intelligence and his ability to cut through the tsunami of Orwellian language, which seems to dominate postmodern America. When Ben and I met a few months ago, we agreed that America and the world was heading in the wrong direction. Israel, as never before, is under attack by the overbred, overeducated, chattering classes. We decided that Ben would not just analyze the various problems, but would provide a how-to manual on saving Israel. Before Ben takes the podium, we would like to take this opportunity to wish Ben and his wife a mazel tov on the birth of their son, Gabriel. Baby boy, mazel tov. Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Shapiro.
I apologize if I'm not quite as coherent as usual. I'm a little short on sleep. But I want to begin by thanking the Avrech family for the tremendous honor of allowing me to speak in memory of their son Ariel, alav shalom, and may his memory be a blessing. The topic of today's talk is how you could save Israel. So this could be either a very long or very short talk, depending on which direction we're going to go. why don't we start by diagnosing the problem? So first of all, the big problem is that a lot of people think that Israel has no future at all. And this is true on virtually every side of the aisle. So James Baker, who is now a Trump foreign policy advisor, you may remember James Baker as the fellow who said, F the Jews, they don't vote for us anyway, during the first Bush administration, HW. He said to J Street, which is a far-left, not really Jewish organization that is funded by outside anti-Israel forces and was just linked to pushing the Iran deal. He said, this is last year, he said, it seems to me Israel's future absent a two-state solution could be very difficult at best. I fear Israel risks losing either its Jewish character or its democratic character as long as it occupies Arab lands. Hillary Clinton, who of course is now going to be the Democratic nominee, despite Bernie Sanders and his shouting mobs, she said in 2013, according to Haaretz, quote, Clinton claimed she cannot really understand what's going on in Israel in a period where the U.S. is working hard with countries around the world to strengthen their civil sector organizations and structures. Israel appears to be moving in the opposite direction. Clinton related that she had read a day before in the Washington Post an article by Ruth Marcus, which detailed examples of exclusion or boycotting of women. She then related that when she read this report, she was reminded of Rosa Parks, the African-American activist who in 1955 refused to yield her seat on the bus to a white man. She said she is at a loss to understand how such processes could occur in Israel. So Hillary is obviously a very strong Israel critic, and if you don't believe that, look at her relationship with Sidney Blumenthal, who's been a hatchet man against Israel for a very long time, and his son is the ultimate hatchet man, having written an anti-Semitic tract about Israel as Goliath. John Kerry, who's the current Secretary of State, has said very similar things in 2013. He said failure of the talks between Israel and the Palestinians would increase Israel's isolation in the world and could lead to a third intifada. So this is all very troubling stuff from the people who are supposed to be our allies. And of course, President Obama, whose administration is the most anti-Israel administration in the history of the State of Israel, he himself has talked in terms of if Israel doesn't make a deal with its enemies, terrorists, if they don't do this, then they are going to suffer the pangs of demise at a certain point. He said, how can you preserve a Jewish state reflective of the best values? You have to make peace with the Palestinians. So the notion here seems to be that Israel is on the verge of destruction if Israel doesn't surrender its own character, if Israel doesn't make some sort of deal with the Palestinians, and if Israel doesn't learn to live with the nuclear Iran, which is the other half of the Middle Eastern threat. So we'll go through all of the various threats Israel is facing, and then we'll talk about how we in the community can help fight those various threats. So there are 4 external threats and 4 internal threats in Israel. The 4 external threats are classical Christian anti-Jewish hatred, right-wing anti-Jewish hatred, left-wing anti-Jewish hatred, and Muslim anti-Jewish hatred. Those are really the 4 kind of threats that Israel is seeing externally now. A year ago, I wouldn't have said that there was a big problem with right-wing Jewish hatred. Unfortunately, the Trump candidacy has overturned some rocks, and some people are crawling out from beneath those rocks that are not very pleasant. So we'll start with the classical Christian Jew hatred issue. So this has become less and less of a problem in the United States over the years. It used to be that Christians in the United States, or at least a broad swath of Christians in the United States, were much more anti-Israel than pro-Israel. That has changed dramatically. Evangelical Christians are now the best friends that Israel ever had. They're better friends than most Jews are to the state of Israel. 82% of white evangelical Christians believe that God gave Israel to the Jewish people. Only 40% of Jews believe that. So white evangelical Christians are significantly more pro-Israel than Jews are. 50% of white evangelicals believe Israel will not be able to coexist peacefully with an independent Palestinian state, which of course is correct. That's only believed by a very small fraction of Jews. Unfortunately, there's a new movement inside Christianity that's moved all of Christianity in the United States to the left that threatens the relationship between churches and the state of Israel. We've seen this with the Presbyterian Church here in the United States, which recently voted in favor of boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel. We've seen this from the Catholic Church, where the current Pope is not particularly pro-Israel and has called Mahmoud Abbas a man of peace, and he has said that he stood by silently while a Palestinian leader, he went to Israel and he visited the Palestinian territories, and he said he stood by while a Palestinian leader said that Palestinians were walking in the footsteps of the divine child and the Israelis were King Herod. And Pope Francis then said, we are not yet done with the present-day Herods who fear peace more than war and who are prepared to continue killing. He said this in front of Palestinians. This is the current leader of the Catholic Church. So there is a problem within Christian communities. That problem is largely the nexus of Christianity and political leftism. Pope Francis is a liberation theologist. He's a Marxist who also happens to be a Catholic, and he's merged these two things together to come up with a perverse view of the New Testament that allows for a pretty anti-Israel view. The Catholic Church has not been particularly pro-Israel historically, but Pope Francis is a return to a relatively anti-Israel Catholic Church after a brief respite under John Paul II and Benedict. The second threat that Israel faces externally is right-wing nationalist Jew hatred. So I have to say, I was wrong. I spent years believing that there was no such right-wing nationalist Jew hatred, at least not in any prominent numbers. And I suppose that was relatively self-serving of me, considering that I'm a right-wing nationalist. But that being said, the Trump candidacy, when I say it's overturned a few rocks, I mean it's overturned a large number of rocks. There's a reason that Donald Trump himself has said that he doesn't take moral sides between Israel and the Palestinians. He said this in open debate. There's a reason that Donald Trump has refused to condemn very real anti-Semitism. He's done this twice. 3 times, actually. He did this first when he was asked about David Duke and the KKK and pretended he didn't know who they were 3 days after condemning David Duke and the KKK, but also 2 days before the Louisiana primary. He did it again after there was a person named Julia Jaffe who writes for GQ, and she wrote a piece that was very anti-Melania Trump, and she got a bunch of anti-Semitic death threats. I have to say, personally, I've never received the level of anti-Semitism online ever, including during the Gaza war, that I've received since I came out as an anti-Trump conservative. It's astonishing. I mean, after my baby was born, I was literally hit with tweets calling my baby a cockroach and like full on, you and your wife and your 2 children should be sent to gas chambers, that kind of stuff. Like overt, basic anti-Semitism, which I thought was basically dead. But there's a movement called the alt-right, which I'll explain in a moment, that has begun to gain some credibility. Donald Trump, the second time Donald Trump did it is to get back to the Julia Jaffe story. Julia Jaffe was hit with a bunch of anti-Semitic death threats. And she went to the FBI. I mean, they were serious enough. People were calling her home phone number. And Donald Trump was asked about this by Wolf Blitzer on national television. And Wolf Blitzer said, she's receiving anti-Semitic death threats. He said, I don't know anything about anti-Semitic death threats. He said, well, she's receiving them. Do you at least condemn that? He said, well, she wrote a really bad piece. And Melania Trump did the same thing in an interview in the last week, actually. She was asked about the same exact issue. She said, well, it's bad, but she provoked it. I wasn't aware that you can provoke anti-Semitic death threats. This is now part of the normal conversation. There's part of the Trump movement that springs from a almost blood and soil nationalism. It's not based on the Constitution. It's not based on American philosophy. It's not based on the idea that there are inalienable rights that are written down in the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution of the United States. It's based on the idea that you're here and therefore you deserve more things. And Donald Trump has brought about the empowerment of a particular set of people who believe that anybody who is quote-unquote foreign is a threat. And I'm not just talking about illegal immigrants. I mean, I'm in favor of building a wall, and I wasn't, while Donald Trump was saying that building a wall was terrible back in 2012. I'm saying that Donald Trump's supporters, and it's not all of them, because he has a big base of support, there's a small coterie of supporters who have been elevated, people like Pat Buchanan, who believe that anybody who is outside sort of the ethnic nationalism of the original WASPs of the United States, that those people are a threat to the United States, and those same people, not coincidentally, have a deep hatred of Israel and a very strong dislike of Jews as an ethnicity. So it's honestly, it's been a shock to me. It's a shock to the system, for sure. And it derives from a conspiratorial version of politics that Donald Trump traffics in and forwards, because he'll take his support anywhere he can get it. I don't think Donald Trump is an anti-Semite. I think Donald Trump is a cynical man who will use any audience that he can in order to gain support. And he'll pander to the worst sorts of people because they like him, whether it's Vladimir Putin, or whether it's the Chinese government, or whether it's open anti-Semites inside his own movement. And again, the best indicator of this is the re-empowerment of Pat Buchanan, who, as we all remember, was sort of marginalized after 1992, and now has come back with a vengeance. And he and his crowd are back in, and if you look at Trump's platform and Buchanan's platform, they're basically the same. So this is the second threat to the state of Israel. Donald Trump has no Middle Eastern policy, and more importantly, the right-wing anti-Semites who actually inhabit the rocks that he's overturned, these people are going to play a part in a Donald Trump administration. Then there is Muslim Jew hatred, which of course is the most virulent form and the most scary for the state of Israel, because Israel is surrounded by these folks. Maybe the only decent outcome of the Iran deal is that some of this has actually been tamped down from places like Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Egypt because they're so scared of Iran that they're now siding with Israel. There's less pressure on Israel than at any time in its history to make a deal with the Palestinians because everybody is scared to death of the Iranians. So Muslim-Jew hatred continues unabated, but the strategic nature of the Middle East has shifted a little bit thanks to President Obama's wild incompetence and anti-Israel sentiment. So it's an unintended side effect, but Israel now has no pressure and is actually in a de facto alliance with the Saudis and with the Jordanians and with the Egyptians against both ISIS and the Iranians. But Muslim-Jew hatred continues to exist and will continue to exist and be a threat not just to Jews in Israel, but to Jews all over the world, whether it's Paris or whether it's here. Finally, there's Western leftist Jew hatred, and this, I think, has infected the church. I think it's infected the European countries. I think it's infected the United States. I think it's infected the Republican Party. And this is the notion that Israel is bad because Israel is prosperous. Israel is bad because Israel is rich. Israel is bad because Israel is doing well in the world. And the richer Israel gets, the better off the better off they are. The argument goes, the worse Israel must be. So there are a couple sources for Western leftist anti-Jewish hatred. The first is that there's an actual group of people on the left who see the Bible as a threat. The same people who hate Christians hate Jews. The same people who think that evangelical Christians are a grave threat to freedom think that Jews who believe in Torah are a grave threat to freedom. And these are the people who are going to try and ban circumcision in San Francisco. And these are the people who are going to try and come after schools like this one if they don't hire gay administrators. And they're going to come after shuls like Yik if they don't perform same-sex marriages. That group of people, they just don't like the Chumash, they don't like Tanakh, and they don't like religious people generally, and so there's an atheistic Jew hatred that's part and parcel of the atheistic war on religion that exists. But the kind of softer Jew hatred and the more insidious Jew hatred is this particularized hatred of success. The leftist thought is based on the premise that if there are two people in a room, one person is rich and one person is poor, the rich person must somehow have screwed the poor person. That if there's somebody with $5 and somebody with $1, the person with 5 must have done something to the person with 1. So when they look writ large at the world and they see that not only are Jews successful in the United States, but Jews are successful in Israel, they say, well, the Jews must have screwed somebody. Somebody had to really be damaged in order for Jews to become the successful. And so there's a sort of impoverished class in the United States that looks at Jews and they say they run Hollywood and they run the banks, and that's because they must have done something nefarious to hurt people. And then they look to the Middle East and they see Israel, which is prosperous and has great technology and is growing and is thriving, despite all of the threats that surround it, despite all of its own internal problems. They look at all of that and they say to themselves, well, Israel must have done something wrong. Israel must have committed a sin, some sort of founding sin. So they fall back on, they committed a founding sin against the Palestinians because it's very difficult to argue that Israel is in a continual state of sin against people who execute gays and people who won't let women go to school. So what they have to do is they come up with some original sin that can never be wiped away. Right? And the original sin is the creation of the state of Israel itself. That can never be wiped away. Even if Israel were to give back, even if Israel were to hand over for no reason at all, the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip, obviously that would not appease anybody because the original sin can never be alleviated. The original sin was the creation of Tel Aviv. The original sin was the creation of Haifa. The original sin was not the creation of small settlements in Efrat or small settlements in the Gaza Strip. And you've seen this. I mean, has there been an elevation of anti-Israel sentiment in the left-wing community or a decrease in anti-Semitism in the left-wing community since the handover of the Gaza Strip in 2006? The answer, obviously, has been a massive increase in the amount of anti-Semitism in the left-wing community because now they feel that Israel has handed them the baton. Israel has admitted that it committed these original sins, and now Israel must be forced to continually give things up until these sins are alleviated and everybody is appeased. So Israel's facing significant threats on all sides, and it manifests in ways both near and far. It manifests on our college campuses, where we have professors who are ardently in favor of pushing for divestment from Israel. It manifests at a national political level, where you have a new isolationism that's washing over American politics on both sides. Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, their foreign policy is actually relatively similar. All of it is bring our soldiers home, bring the money home. We just need to get out of that whole region entirely. Ignoring, of course, and put aside Israel for a second. It's terrible for America. It's bad policy for the United States. It's obviously not good policy for Israel if the United States withdraws and starts doing commerce with Israel's main enemies. And it's manifesting, obviously, in Europe, where the BDS movement is gaining steam and where anti-Semitism is gaining steam, both due to a combination. Europe is the canary in the coal mine as far as anti-Semitism, because you're seeing all of these things happen at the exact same time, right? You're seeing the rise of an anti-Semitism inside the Catholic Church. You're seeing a rise in leftist anti-Semitism that's resulting in the election of governments that are wildly anti-Israel. You're seeing a rise in European ethno-nationalism on the far right that is anti-Israel. And you're also seeing a rise in Muslim anti-Semitism inside Europe, right? And Europeans are not doing anything about it. So all of these things are happening in Europe. So if you like how Europe is going, that's sort of a microcosm of what the world is moving toward over the next 10 to 20 years. And then there are some internal threats that Israel faces as well. And the internal threats are slightly less troubling because Israel is moving in the right direction on a lot of these. So for example, you hear a lot about the supposed demographic threat that Israel faces. Jews are not having enough babies, Palestinians are having lots of babies, and therefore there won't be enough Jews to populate the state. This is not true. So the demographic argument is overblown. If Israel were to absorb all of the territories right now and make everybody a citizen, I mean, this is basically the proposal of Carolyn Glick. If Israel were to do that right now, there still would not be a demographic threat because the birth rates in the Palestinian community are going down and the birth rates in the Jewish community are actually going up. So the demographic threat is a little bit overblown in terms of the state of Israel, and also it's a little bit overblown because so many religious people in Israel are moving toward religious Zionism, so that's actually a movement that's well worthwhile. The second threat that Israel is facing is an economic threat. This is a deeper threat and a more problematic threat because of all of the threats with regard to trade. So you see, for example, that the Europeans are now looking to basically sanction Israel for continuing to exist. The nice thing about the Europeans is they're a bunch of greedy whores. So at the end of the day, if Israel has good products to provide to the Europeans, they will continue to take those good products the same way that they did for oil from Iraq or natural gas from Iran. If Israel is willing to provide a good technological product that nobody else can provide anywhere else, the Europeans will take it. So that's the good news about the economic threat, is that so long as Israel continues to make economic progress, and that means lowering taxes, and it also means ensuring that their social safety net doesn't drag down the state. And this is, in fact, actually, this is the biggest accomplishment of the Netanyahu administration in Israel. It's not on foreign policy, it's on economics, where he's been fighting an uphill battle to tear down regulations and tear apart the coalition of interest groups that have saddled Israel with tremendous debt and a tremendous spending regime. If Israel is able to do that, then Israel has the best intellectual capital on the face of the earth. So Israel will be a massively powerful country economically as soon as Israel removes a lot of the ties that are holding it down. And I think that that's the direction that Israel is going to be likely to move, not because of economics, but because there's a new consensus in Israel. And the new consensus in Israel is that there are very real security threats from places like Iran. And it turns out that just like in the United States, in Israel, when people vote on security, they vote to the right. And so as a byproduct of that, that will give Netanyahu additional power to continue to forge better economic policy and more free economic policy. And the third threat that's internal to Israel is the secular threat in Israel. The leftism of Israel has been a problem more historically than it is now. That's the secular threat to Israel that really doesn't understand why Israel exists in the first place, because we now live in a time where ethnic solidarity is seen as a bad, which I generally agree with. I don't like ethnic solidarity. I like religious solidarity or philosophical solidarity. I couldn't care less that Noam Chomsky was born a Jew. He means nothing to me. But the ethnic solidarity doesn't go very far for secular people particularly, and so if you don't have a religious reason for Israel being there, and if you think that the world is warm toward you, which unfortunately a lot of secular leftists in Israel do, if they think the world's a wonderful place to Jews, because they think this, they really don't understand why Israel exists, and they put Israel in danger. The good news and the bad news is that because there are such tremendous external threats in Israel now, because the ever-present threat of Iran looming on Israel's northern border, essentially, because of Hezbollah, that threat means that the secular left has basically lost whatever credibility it had in Israel. Because the original argument for Israel that we're now going back to is there needs to be a place that's safe for Jews, and as the world becomes more unsafe for Jews, the secular left has lost almost its reason for existence in Israel. It was to protect, the secular left in Israel was to protect against the religious Jews, and now the religious Jews are saying, well, this is what we've been saying all along. Which brings us to the fourth threat in Israel, and this one, again, I think also is being alleviated. I think Israel's getting better and the rest of the world is getting worse, actually. The fourth threat in Israel is the threat of the religious. And the threat of the religious is basically from far-right groups in Israel, the Haredi groups in Israel, largely, who say that Israel is a religious state, that the secular state has no meaning, and refuse to serve in the army, but want welfare anyway. This is also, I think, being alleviated over time. I think that this is becoming a smaller problem, not a larger problem. I think it's a problem that we actually here in the United States can have an impact on. So with all of those problems out of the way, now we can talk about a few of the solutions. So I want to go through all of these. So to fight Christian-Jew hatred, whatever Jew hatred there is inside the Christian world, the first thing that we need to do in the Jewish community is we need to acknowledge that the alliance exists. The biggest problem that I see in the Jewish community with regard to the Christian community is refusal to even acknowledge at a basic level that the folks over at Christians United for Israel, for example, are actually our friends, and we ought to work with them. Now, the objections that we usually get with regard to Christians United for Israel is they must think, really, that the only reason they're helping us is because they want us all to go back to Israel, and then there will be Armageddon, and then Jesus will come back, and all the rest of it. First of all, as somebody who actually talks with evangelical Christians, unlike most of the people who think this is not what evangelical Christians believe, at least not the vast bulk of them. If you talk to them, what they actually believe, the reason they support Israel, is because, as those polls show, they believe God gave Israel to the Jews, and they believe that we are the root of the tree and they are the branch from that tree. This is what evangelical Christians largely believe at this point. The kind of Armageddon theology that we're talking about here is a very minute strain inside evangelical Christianity, but it is not by any means a majority strain. Second of all, even if that's what they thought, the answer would be, okay, so what? Right? So what? When Jesus comes back, we'll talk. Right? Well, the Jews historically, pickers can't be choosers when it comes to our allies. Right? We don't have a lot of them, so we may as well forge alliances with the people who actually want to forge alliances with us. So we have to be more overt about the fact that we're happy to work with evangelical Christians. And what this also means, and this goes to the right-wing nationalist increase inside the Republican Party and the rise of Trumpism, this also means that Jews need to be politically active on causes that affect Christians. We can't just be a single-issue voting bloc. And we're not. I mean, the truth is that it's pathetic to me, for example, that all of the leaders on moral issues that affect Jews, right, all of the leaders on religious freedom issues are Christians. Right? Why is it that the Christians have to take a lead role when it comes to discussions about, for example, whether the Supreme Court should rule that same-sex marriage happen inside churches, which will happen in the next 3 years, or that religious schools be ripped away, their 501c3 exemptions be ripped away? Why is it always Christians who have to lead that argument? It's actually a problem, and it's a problem for Christians because Christians are still a majority in this country, so they're not seen by anybody as a victim group. Jews are a vast minority. See, there's this oddity when it comes to religious freedom questions. The left will always go up against the two Christian bakers who own a bakery and have 5 children and don't feel like servicing a same-sex wedding. They don't feel like going to the same-sex wedding and giving a cake to it. Right? But they'll never do the same thing with Muslims. Why? Because they think the Muslims are victims. So you actually need a religious alliance. Christians need Jews to stand up at this point and say, okay, well, this is discrimination against us too. In other words, if they think we only care about Israel, which we don't, right? I mean, we have a lot of issues that we care about that affect our lives. If they think Jews only care about Israel, they're likely to say, okay, well, they're not helping us. Why would we help them? The left has done this on a routine basis, and it's very effective. People always wonder, for example, why is it that the LGBT community is so much in support of the Muslim community in the United States when the Muslim community in the United States is supported by the Saudi government largely, and the Saudi government literally prosecutes gay people? Right? Why is there this alliance? Why is there such softness toward the Islamic world by the LGBT community? And the answer is it's an alliance of convenience. Right? They've decided that they basically made a trade. Muslims will side with the LGBT community in fighting the kind of national security interests of the right in the United States, and the LGBT community will side with Muslims in fighting the other way. The LGBT community will fight with Muslims to destroy a lot of the national security apparatus, and in return, Muslims will fight with the LGBT community to grow government in opposition to religious freedom. That's basically been the main alliance. It's a victim group alliance to elect Democrats. And so this is the basic goal, right? It's all politics is the politics of coalitions. The right needs to understand this too. Jews need to understand this too. We can't just sit out to the side and say all we care about is Israel. We have to stand up and we have to be heard on issues that also impact us. I mean, the most obvious one, right? Where was the Jewish community in the same-sex marriage debate? The Orthodox community I'm talking about. Where is the Orthodox community on this? Where's the Orthodox community now on abortion? Right? Why aren't they saying anything? It turns out the Orthodox aren't really pro-abortion. So why is it that it's only Christians who lead the way? one of the things, if you want to woo allies, you have to make clear that their priorities also matter to you, not just sit around saying, why don't my priorities matter to you? Okay, when it comes to Muslim-Jew hatred, one of the things that we can do, Muslim-Jew hatred is a tough one because I don't think that there's a lot that we can do other than try and magnify particular voices in the Muslim community who have been marginalized. And they've been marginalized because there aren't that many of them. I mean, the fact is that groups like CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, it's an extremist group that actually supports terrorism. It was an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial about 9/11. Right? They've been invited to the White House by the Bush administration and the Obama administration. There are not very many moderate voices inside the Muslim world. What we can do, however, is we can lobby. And this is where I'm going to say some controversial stuff about AIPAC. And I know there are a lot of AIPAC supporters in the crowd. So a couple of controversial, so here's the good thing about AIPAC, and then here's the bad thing about AIPAC. The good thing about AIPAC, when AIPAC says that they're going to fly people to Israel and do pro-Israel outreach to people in Congress, this is a good thing. It's a great thing. It's wonderful. When they have your kids to AIPAC seminars and they teach them about how to defend Israel, all of that is wonderful. The problem with AIPAC is that AIPAC is also a highly politicized organization that pretends it is the only voice and the loudest voice on behalf of the state of Israel, and it's highly political. And when I say it's highly political, what I mean is the upper echelon of AIPAC is dominated by Democratic consultants. And those Democratic consultants were the same people who refused to push hard in 2014 for a resolution that would have killed the Iran deal before it started. They were too afraid to do it. They were too afraid to do it because they didn't want to alienate Democrats. I remember these discussions. I was part of them. The AIPAC made the conscious decision that they were not going to encourage and force a vote on the floor of the Senate that would have basically killed the Iran deal before it started because they were afraid that Democrats would have to filibuster the deal and they would look bad before the 2014 elections. So the problem with AIPAC is that AIPAC, if you're going to pretend to be the pro-Israel organization, you actually have to stand up to people who are doing anti-Israel things. It's not just enough to be pro-Israel, you have to stand up to people who are doing the stuff that's anti-Israel. So what I would recommend to folks is that if you're going to give money to AIPAC, if you're going to back AIPAC, earmark your dollars. Right? Earmark your dollars for certain activities that you think are worthwhile. You can do this on your checks. And then don't give money to their general political lobbying, because their general political lobbying is, again, very corrupt. Any sort of organization that declares itself bipartisan but doesn't stand up for its cause is not worth its salt to me. I mean, I've said for a long time, and I've taken very controversial positions on Donald Trump, and one of the reasons is because I don't think that he backs any of my principles, even though he's in the party that I've supported my entire political adult life. If you're not willing to do that, then you're not worth your salt as an organization or as a principled person or as a commentator. So that's my problem with AIPAC. That being said, the best way to fight Muslim-Jew hatred, you need to start on campus, right, where Muslim-Jew hatred has become extraordinarily prominent with the help of the left. The way that you fight BDS is not by putting up falafel sales on campus. Right? All these organizations, they think that the way to fight anti-Israel sentiment is to put up, and you see these billboards all over LA, you know, they'll put up the billboards of bikini-clad women, right, on Israeli beaches. Well, it turns out we have bikini-clad women here. Like, why does that make Israel special? And they do the same thing on campus. They have these tents of peace, and they get together and come to our dinners. We're going to give you free food. It turns out the college students can get free food a lot of places, and the Hillel is not necessarily the happening spot when it comes to what kids actually want to do when they're in college. Right? The fact that people who show up to Hillel generally are people who are already supportive of Israel. It's not exactly the world's greatest outreach tool. The fact is that the people who are on campus, and I know that campus has become a big battleground, which is why I'm talking about it. People on campus break down into three groups. There are the hardcore anti-Israel people, there are the hardcore pro-Israel people, and then there are the other 99% of people who don't care about any of this stuff at all. And the other 99% of people are not swayed by you handing out falafel or telling them they can get free pizza at the Hillel. Right? Those 99% of people are not swayed. Just like the world is not swayed. Every time Israel comes out and says, look what a wonderful liberal state we are as far as what we allow in our country, nobody ever says, oh, well, that's great. You need to make that case, but that's the entirety of your case. That's not good enough. The other half of the case has to be making the case that the opposition are the bad guys. Every moral narrative has to have a bad guy. The problem is that in the pro-Israel community, there's a reticence to actually name the bad guy. Right? They just say, well, good people we are, but they never say, no, the bad guys are the terrorists who are strapping bombs to their kids. Even during the Gaza war, there was this peculiar tendency on campus, particularly, that we can't say anything too mean about Hamas because otherwise it'll alienate people. This is the same kind of foolish political analysis that says negative ads don't work. Of course negative ads work. They're the only ads that work. The fact is that if you want to win on the Israel basis, you have to make the case not just that Israel is good, but that its enemies are evil, which happens to be true. So that's actually an easy case to make, but you need to find organizations that you support on campus willing to make that case, not just going out there and putting up a poster that no one sees. You have to be deliberately provocative. You have to make the issue so toxic that people run away from it. You actually have to make the issue so toxic, because otherwise what happens is college kids have this real unearned sense of moral superiority that they're looking to invest somewhere. Right? They have this grand unearned moral capital that they get from their parents' bank account in their lifetime of doing nothing. And now they want to invest it somewhere to make themselves feel better. They're going to invest it in an anti-Israel cause so long as they're told that Israel is unfair. And the only way to fight that is to say, forget about Israel being unfair. You're an anti-Semite because you're saying that. And the reason you're an anti-Semite for saying that is because you're holding Israel to a different standard than you'd hold anybody else. And this is sort of what I said when I went to UCLA. They're having a BDS hearing a couple of years ago. This is a case in point of how bad the pro-Israel community is at this. They were having a BDS. They were having a BDS movement at UCLA. This started about 3 years ago. And so they brought up a resolution before the student council to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. And so all of the Jewish kids, they did a good job. They got all the kids in the room, and they were going to, and so the room was kind of separated in, I would say, it was about 40% pro-Israel, 60% anti-Israel. And people were being given, I think it was 5 minutes, or three, it wasn't even 5, I think it was 3 minutes a shot to get up and say what they wanted to say on the microphone, and this board of students would then rule on whether Israel should be divested from. And the juxtaposition was incredible, because what was happening is the Palestinians would get up there, and their advocates, they would get up there and they would tell outright fabrications about Israel. I was there, I was at a checkpoint, and an Israeli soldier took a woman out of line and raped her right in front of me. I mean, really, this is the kind of stuff that they were saying. Right? I was there, and they took a kid out of line, and they put a gun to his head, and they almost shot him, and they would have shot him, and he was 3. Right? This is the kind of stuff they were saying. And the pro-Israel students would then feel the necessity to get up and say, Israel doesn't do these things, this is made up, this isn't true. And so after watching like 2 hours of this and being repeatedly texted, my wife turned to me. My wife was at UCLA Medical School. She's graduating in about 2 weeks here. She turned to me and she was telling me about all this, and I said, okay, fine, take the baby. And so I drove over to UCLA, and I cut somebody in line. Somebody gave me their spot in line, and what I said had nothing to do with Israel. What I said was, all of the people on the other side here hate Jews, and the only reason we're here tonight is because so many of these people hate Jews. And the proof that they hate Jews is that Iran is hanging gay people right now, and they don't care, and the Palestinians are strapping bombs to their kids, and they don't care, and the Saudis are chopping people's hands off for stealing, and they don't care, and women in Afghanistan are having acid thrown in their face for going to school, and they don't care. But Israel wants to maintain its own security, and suddenly they care. Right? So you tell me, who's the real hater here? Who's the real problem here? And the vote ended up swiveling. There was one voter who, it was going to be a tie vote, and one of the votes ended up swiveling, we found out later, because of that speech, and the speech went viral. The reason that worked is because people were willing to draw the moral narrative, and it's not hard, this is not unique, anybody can do this. But you actually have, so here's the kicker. So the next year, they brought it back on campus. And what they did is this time they barred outside people from speaking. Right? So they passed a resolution to bar outside people from speaking. So what I wanted to do anyway is organize a group of students to stand out in front of this is all a public relations game, right? So far as this is concerned, it's all a media public relations game. I wanted to get a group of UCLA students, I have a bunch of UCLA students who are kind of my evil minions, and they were gonna go and they were gonna stand outside the BDS hearing holding signs saying things like, Iran hangs gay people, right? All the things that I was saying. And there are a number of Jewish groups who are very active on campus, and they explicitly tried to shut down our counter-protest. There were 100 RSVPs. They started putting out notices that the event had been canceled, which was not true. They started telling people not to show up. They said it was better to do nothing than to show our faces and fight back. We had the same issue with the Presbyterian Church. When the Presbyterian Church wanted to boycott and divest, I wanted to go there with, we were organizing this, we were in the process of doing this. I wanted to go there with a group, because I understand how cameras work. Right? I wanted to go there with a group of 300 middle school and younger age Jewish kids and hold a candlelight vigil and pray for the souls of the Christians who are about to vote on this. Right? And all of the same groups, all the same people who've said, oh, we've been fighting BDS for years, they said, don't do this. If you do this, you'll fracture the movement. Out of deference to them, we didn't do it. BDS ends up getting voted in. Now, maybe BDS gets voted in anyway, But the reality is that, unfortunately, there are a lot of groups that make a lot of money off the problems being big, not the problems being small. If you actually want to win, you actually have to fight. And so, this is harsh language, but there are a lot of people out there who don't actually want to win. There are a lot of people who want to throw fundraisers with fancy dinners and don't actually want to do anything on campus that's meaningful. They just want to tell you that they're doing things on campus that are meaningful. They snap one photo of 15 kids on campus, and they said, we've done something today. And it makes people feel better. But there are better places to put your money. And if you're going to put your money into groups, make sure where the money is going. Like, earmark it for projects. Fine. I was very active. I ran part of the 501c3. I insisted our donors earmark every dollar that they put into our kitty for a particular project. So that it's not just we're signing a check and that check ends up going to administrative. Finally, when it comes to the internal threats to Israel, the only thing that I can say about the internal threats to Israel is that Israel is becoming more independent. I'm very positive about the future of the state of Israel. Israel is becoming more independent of the American Jewish community, and it's a very good thing. For a long time, for most of my life, it seemed like the Israeli thought process followed the American thought process. So you'd have a bunch of Jews in America who said, we should have a peace process. And then Jews in Israel said, oh, the Americans are saying it, let's do that. And now it feels like the Israelis finally said, boy, those Jews were out of their minds, this has been a mistake. And they're beginning to generate a certain amount of independence that I think is very positive for the state of Israel. And I think that what we need to do as Orthodox parents, as Jewish parents, is educate our children properly on the morality of the conflict, because they are going to be facing all these obstacles. And it can't, again, just be happy talk. It has to be understanding that the fight is something worthwhile engaging in, and that the state of Israel is important not just as a homeland for Jews who are threatened, because when we live in America, which is the safest country for Jews that was ever created, when we live in a country like the United States, it's very easy for people to be swayed away from the security argument. We need to actually inform our kids why Israel is important on a religious level. Why is Judaism special? What does Judaism have to teach the world? Why does there need to be a Jewish state in the first place? It sounds rudimentary, it sounds basic. Nobody does this at the schools. Nobody actually does this, right? It's just sort of assumed. And this is why so many college kids on Israel and on Judaism generally, they go to college and they're hearing arguments they've never heard before, both political and Judaically and religiously. So the only answer to that is to actually teach our kids on a basic level. And for us, that's tough, because that means we have to revisit our own hashkafa. It means we actually have to go back and look at, why are we doing all these things? Why do these things matter? And if you don't have a good answer for that, then we better bone up, because our kids certainly won't have a good answer for that. Thanks so much. Happy to take questions.
That was absolutely brilliant. I'm sure you all benefited from that. Your thoughts were very provoking. Okay, so here's my question. This is more than a question. I don't know that you can answer it.
I'll repeat the question in case people can't hear.
But you did not paint Trump in a really good light
Right.
as far as Israel.
Yes.
And we all know where Hillary Clinton sits as far as Israel.
Yes.
So what are we doing?
Yeah, so this is obviously the big question on everybody's mind is Trump versus Hillary. The question was, so what exactly do we do? Because I didn't paint Trump in a particularly pro-Israel light. So I can tell you what I'm going to do so far, right? So I'm a never Trump unless person, meaning I will not vote for Trump, I will not vote for Hillary, I won't vote for either of them unless Trump can actually manifest that he has some tuchas, meaning he can actually sit still for a second on issues and he actually believes in those issues. Otherwise, I'm just going to assume that he's lying to me, because he is. The reason I say this is because if I had to go into a ballot tomorrow, if I had to go into the ballot box tomorrow, if I had to go into a voting booth tomorrow, and I had to choose who do I think is going to be better for Israel tomorrow, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? I don't know the answer, but I would probably guess Trump, because I know Hillary's going to be terrible. Although I have to say that Donald Trump's isolationist foreign policy, his willingness to hand over foreign policy leadership to Vladimir Putin of Russia, his absolute distaste for any sort of moral analysis of the Middle East, his isolationism, his willingness there's part of Trump that would just try to force a deal on Israel because he's such a narcissist, he's such a pathological narcissist. I mean, he said this, or he said openly, this would be the biggest deal anybody ever did. It would be huge, it would be a huge deal. It would be the hugest deal, right? Frankly, let me tell you, believe me, right? And so there's part of him that would try and force something, And he thinks he knows everything. The problem with Trump is he doesn't know what he doesn't know, right? Which is why people laughed out loud at him at AIPAC, right? When he says that that I know the most about the Iran deal of anybody in the world, and everybody just starts laughing. So as I say, if I had to put money on it, I would give 60-40 odds Trump would be better for Israel than Hillary. I don't know if that's true. He could be wildly worse for Israel. This is the problem with Trump, right? It's either snake eyes or you have a full house. I mean, it's two different gambling analogies, but it's either come up with nothing or you've got a full house with Trump. It could be great. It could be the worst thing that ever happened. The problem for me is, as a conservative and as somebody who cares about the future of the state of Israel beyond the next 4 years, I think however it goes in the next 4 years, things are going to wildly suck. The question is going to be who actually is going to take over the mantle of the Republican Party. I don't have a lot of faith the Democratic Party is going to come back to Jesus here. But I do think that the Republican Party at a certain point is going to have another one of these internal battles. If Trump is the winner of that internal battle, that does not bode well for the state of Israel. Again, the people who are defending him on foreign policy are people like James Baker and people like Pat Buchanan. So it's the worst election of my lifetime. I wake up every morning wanting to put my head in the oven. I mean, it's awful.
My question is, that was the natural question after your wonderful presentation. Following that question is, how did we get here? How did we have wonderful candidates? What happened?
Yeah.
What happened?
Okay, so the question is, what happened in this election cycle that we end up with an orange God king versus Hillary Clinton? And the answer, on the left, Hillary Clinton is who Hillary Clinton is. It was always going to be Hillary Clinton. I have to say, her absolute incompetence as a campaigner should put to death once and forever the myth that Barack Obama was the most magnificent candidate in the history of man in 2008. She's almost losing to a 73-year-old. Is he 74 now? He's 70. Okay, so 70. He had his birthday. Congratulations. A man who's somewhere between 70 and death, and is a 1930s style Brooklyn socialist to boot. Like, she's losing to that guy. So don't give me how great Obama was. In any case, you had that on the left. That's what it is. I mean, the Clintons run the party. On the right, what happened is, I think, three things. And I think Trump. The question is Trump a long-lasting movement or is he a black swan? If he becomes the president, he's a movement. If he loses, he's a black swan. That's my view of it, right? And I would like for him to be a black swan. So it's a problem for me. It's a conflict. So the reason that he came about is because 100% name recognition is an extraordinarily powerful thing. When everybody believes they know you, when 20 years of television have taught you that somebody is a wonderful business person who says all sorts of politically incorrect things, who's kind of a 1960s Rat Pack playboy, and then they come back at him with he's not a very good businessman, which is actually true, and people kind of go, what are you talking about? He's super rich. And when you say, well, he's a bad guy, he panders to racists and anti-Semites. You go, but I saw him on TV. He seems like a nice fellow, and his daughter is an Orthodox Jew. It makes him almost invulnerable to attacks on him, which is what we saw. People were attacking him over and over, and when people would say, you're not conservative enough to him, there's a whole base of the Republican Party that doesn't want to hear that after Mitt Romney and John McCain. So what happened is, I wrote a piece for the Jewish Journal, the only time I've ever read the Jewish Journal. I wrote a piece for the Jewish Journal about this, in which I talked about the three forces that I think led to Trump. One is it's a fully reactionary movement. The Trump movement is fully reactionary. It's not conservative. All the things the left thinks the right was, the Trump movement is. So it is a fully reactionary movement. So it's reacting against anti-Americanism of the Obama administration, and it's reacting with a blind jingoism, meaning that it's not patriotism with a purpose. It's reacting with Obama thinks America sucks and is trying to grind it down. Well, we think America is great. We can't tell you why, and we can't tell you what makes America great, but we're going to make America great again. Yay! And people get behind that. It's an emotional response. And then there's the anti-establishment, right? People think the Republican Party establishment is corrupt, which it is. And so they react with, okay, let's bring in the guy who is the most, unfortunately, this is a human tendency that's really, it's a huge problem, but it's true. The natural tendency of human beings, when faced with a corrupt government that has too much power, is to elect the most corrupt person they can find and give him all the power to break the corrupt government with power. Really, this is what happens. Nobody ever votes for, let's have a smaller government, give me back the power. Right? It almost never happens that way. Demagogues rise in climates of corruption where the government is already too big. right? Hitler didn't come out of an anarchic government. Hitler came out of a government that was really big. The Weimar Republic government was overreaching and large and socialistic and corrupt, and he came out of that. And Trump isn't Hitler for a variety of reasons, including the mustache. But he's also, but he is a reactionary element that is coming from the anti-establishment wing. And then finally, there's been so much political correctness that in the course of my lifetime that people have now mistaken being a jackass for being politically incorrect. They just conflate the two. So when Trump says things when he mocks the disabled, then people just go, oh well. And Trump has said this on national TV. He goes, oh, I'm just being politically incorrect. And everybody who's normal sits there and goes, no, you're just being, right? Because he is. And when he goes after Heidi Cruz, Ted Cruz's wife, and says she's ugly, he says, oh, well, I don't want to be politically correct, I want to be politically incorrect. Okay, politically incorrect is saying to an audience of low-income people that the only people in America who are permanently poor are people who are not good with money, right? As long as they're not, that's politically incorrect, right? Saying things that are factually true but politically inconvenient, that's politically incorrect. Saying things that are rude and nasty isn't politically incorrect, it's just you being a jerk. And so everybody has conflated these two things, and so it's Trump's go-to, it's his all-purpose reply. Whenever he says something that's wildly inappropriate, he says, well, I wouldn't want to be politically incorrect, right? I got embroiled in the whole Michelle Fields, Corey Lewandowski thing, where Corey Lewandowski, his campaign manager, grabbed a reporter by the arm and yanked her hard enough to bruise her arm. Right? I got embroiled in this because the website I worked for refused to defend her, basically, and threw her under the bus because they were worshiping at the altar of Trump. And Trump's defense of his campaign manager, who, by the way, came out and said he never even grabbed her. He said he'd never seen her, he'd never touched her, he just lied outright. His defense of that was, well, I didn't want to get on his case. That would have been politically correct. Right? Basically, when a man who goes and says that people at his rallies should punch other people and he will pay their defense bills, right? When he's asked about this on national TV, he says, well, I don't want to be politically incorrect. I don't want to be politically correct. So it's his all-purpose go-to, and people hate political correctness so much that they forget to define their terms. And so he's just a pure reactionary force. The problem I have is that if he wins, he has won the nomination, which is unbelievable. Nate Silver, I thought, had the best line on this. Nate Silver is the statistician, and he got this totally wrong. And they asked him, why did you get this totally wrong? And he said, because I didn't know that the Republican, you can blame me for not knowing the Republican Party was going to lose its effing mind. Right? And there's truth to that. He won with 42% of the popular vote. Right? He did not, 60%, and he keeps talking about the historic turnout for him. He won slightly more votes than Mitt Romney did in the last go-around, but there were way more votes against him. Way more votes against him. But if he becomes the president, he's going to implement all these policies, and all, as I said earlier, all politics is coalition politics. Whoever leads the coalition is the one who defines which way to go. And if that's Trump, then we're all in trouble. But that's why Trump is where Trump is. Oh, yeah, what's that?
Then my name is Maura Coker, and I'm very involved in political campaigns as a professional, a fundraiser. I am not a registered Republican anymore. I changed after the last election to California's economists do not declare.
Yeah.
You can't just say independent. You have to say
Well, because the Independent Party in California was founded by George Wallace, so yeah.
right. And I am very disturbed at your attitude and some of the and I understand that most of the people in the room are tittering, giggling, and everybody thinks it's cool and it's glib. It is glib. It's not necessarily accurate. Donald Trump's campaign, like all campaigns, continually evolves. Right now, Hillary's campaign is in total disarray because they don't know how to deal with Trump on the right and Bernie on the left. The fact is, Trump has gathered around and is continually to gather around himself people who are not Buchanan or Baker, who no longer have any influence in the Trump campaign.
Who, Baker and Buchanan have no influence in the Trump campaign? Really?
I assure you.
Well, I don't believe you.
Okay.
And the reason, who has influence? He had one meeting with Henry Kissinger. So now Henry Kissinger is his big foreign policy advisor?
No.
So who's his big foreign policy advisor?
He has a core of people, and he's gathering more.
His core of people is Donald Trump.
No, come on, Ben.
He said this himself.
Don't be glib.
You're being glib if you think that you can convince Donald Trump to be the man you think he is.
No, I think that we have to look at something bigger, and you touched on it, but you didn't go into it.
Okay.
Which is ABC, anybody but Clinton.
Okay, so listen, so let me say this. I fully understand people who say they will vote for Trump just to stop Clinton. This is a position with which I'm fine with that position. Dennis Prager takes this position. But people who are talking up Trump or minimizing the problem Trump can be in order to arrive at this conclusion are doing themselves and everybody else a grave disservice.
And I think you're doing a disservice by turning people away from Trump.
Well, I'm sure Trump supporters believe that. I mean, that's not a shock to me. Okay, so listen, again, you want to vote for Trump to stop Clinton. I've said, I think for the next 4 years, there's a good shot that Trump will be better than Clinton. I don't know that because nobody knows that, because until 5 minutes ago, he didn't hold any of the policy positions he now holds, and he won't be holding them 5 minutes from now. Okay, Donald Trump has shifted on every major policy position of this campaign, up to and including the wall, which he now says is an opening bargaining position.
Do you want Hillary Clinton as president?
No, I don't. I want both of them to be cast adrift in a boat. But the fact is that. But let me ask you a countervailing question. Do you want Donald Trump to define conservatism in America for the next 40 years?
No, I frankly don't care about conservatism.
See, and this is okay. So this is the key. No, really, like this is crystallizing.
I care about Israel as much as you or anybody else in this room.
Yes.
And I think he will be better on Israel than Hillary.
Okay, so there's 2 points here that I want to comment on, and then I'll move on because we can have this discussion later. And I know who you are, and we've talked before. So there's a couple of things. One is, eventually in the conversation, we always hit this bottom line with ardent Trump supporters. I don't care about conservatism. I just want a strong man who's going to get the things I like done. I hate that with a passion I cannot even tell you. I think it's anti-American. I think that it's anti-declaration. I think it's anti-constitution. I don't want a strong man. I don't want somebody who's going to, quote unquote, do things for me. I don't trust Donald Trump, and every woman who's trusted Donald Trump can tell you why. Okay, Donald Trump is not a trustworthy individual. Donald Trump, when you say he's continually evolving, okay, he's evolved. When you say he's continually evolving, I don't know another candidate who took 5 positions on abortion in 48 hours. He took 5 of them, okay? And on immigration, he's back to touchback amnesty again. Even his immigration policy. I'm harder core on immigration than Donald Trump is, and it's not close. Donald Trump's current policy is deport everybody and then bring them all back and give them citizenship. He said this. Okay, so this idea that Donald Trump is some sort of wonderful person, again, you want to vote for him over Clinton, totally get it. Dennis Prager's made this point. Bobby Jindal has made this point. He's crap, but he's better than Hillary. I get it. Okay, but the problem is, and I think the honest. No, it isn't. And the reason it's not is because in the end, what it's going to be, I think that this is a timeline question. Everybody I know who is ardently in favor of Donald Trump, people who really like Trump, who are very passionate about Trump, everybody that I know who's in favor of Donald Trump is over the age of 50, and everybody I know who doesn't like Donald Trump and is considering not voting for him is under the age of 50. And the reason for this is because if you think that this is the last stop on the American train, I get this, by the way, if you think that the train that is America stops in the next 4 years, and whatever is the last stop on that train, it can either be Trump or it can be Hillary, it better be Trump, I get it. I don't think that the train stops after the next 4 years, but I do think that what we do have a situation, here's our situation. I think that Barack Obama has taken this country, we're driving toward the cliff. I think Obama took it from 30 miles an hour toward the cliff to 75 miles an hour toward the cliff. It's the greatest single change in the history of the United States. He's a transformative president. Then Donald Trump will take us from 75 to 80. I think Hillary Clinton will take us from 75 to 100, right? I think there's one other problem. I think Donald Trump will take the reverse gear and rip it out of the car. Because I think that the reverse gear is the conservative movement that you don't care about. And I think that once that is gone, there is no possibility of reversing this country back toward anything but a slow decline into inevitable failure. That's my basic argument. So again, I understand if you think the timeline is 4 years, I think the timeline is 40 because I'm 32. Right? And in 40 years, who am I going to vote for? Am I going to be given a choice between far right, far right isn't even the right term, between European nationalist parties like Marine Le Pen? Are we just going to become Europe? Is it Marine Le Pen versus the Social Democratic Party in whatever country? Or is there going to be an actual conservative movement? I'm watching the movement that I fight, the philosophy that not just I fight for in the media every day, but the philosophy that the country was founded on, ripped away and replaced with, but the situation is so dire, we need somebody who's going to break heads and get things done. I'm not in favor of that. So I understand both positions. When I talk down Trump, I think it's important people understand, I think people can make their own decision. But what I don't like, and I don't like it on my side, on the Never Trump side, when people say Hillary isn't going to be bad, Hillary's going to be awful. She's going to be awful. She's going to be a disaster. Okay, so I want people on both sides of this argument, the Never Trump argument and the not Never Trump people, The Never Trump people need to acknowledge Hillary is going to be a disaster. Now, with that in mind, what are the risk factors? People on the other side need to acknowledge Donald Trump is not going to be a great president. He's not even going to be a very good president. Donald Trump is going to be a bad president, not as bad as Hillary, maybe, although we don't know because he's an executive or he doesn't believe in limits on the executive branch. And in the end, they have to acknowledge also what kind of damage he's going to do to the Republican Party. And he is. He's going to do deep damage to the Republican Party. If you don't think so, look at what kind of damage Hoover did to the Republican Party, and Nixon did to the Republican Party, and W did to the Republican Party. Trump will be exponentially worse than any of those, especially because he's repeating Herbert Hoover's policies. Okay, thanks so much.
I'd like to thank Ben for a wonderful talk. I'm sure he'll be available afterwards when you're leading, that you can ply him with more questions. I'm going to call Rabbi Stewart, Ariel's friend, Rabbi Avi Stewart, to come forward to say the Kel Malay Rachamim. And then I'll say the Kaddish, and then you're all invited for brunch. You can feel free to bring the food back here and sit at the table. All rise, please.
Es nishmas Ariel Chaim ben Ruven Yaakov shehalach li'olamo ba'avur shenatvu tzedaka miyad azkaras nishmaso Bigan Eden tehei minuchaso Lochein bal rachamim yastireyu B'seiser kinafav li'olamim V'yitzar mitzrachayim es nishmasoi Adonai
Gadavi Gadash Meirova. Biom Adibrachute. Biom Nichlochte. Chaychonu Chonu Chovet Yisrael. Lakalav Zman Kariv Yimru Amen. Yishmei Rabba Mavarach Ve'olam Meo Maya. Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitbar V'yitramam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar V'yitaleh V'yitalal Shmei Kutshah V'richu Ve'elam Kol Birchatav V'shiratav Tishbachatav Nechpatav Damiran V'yalma V'yimru Amen Al Yisrael V'Rabbanan V'al Talmidehon V'al Kol Talmidehon V'al Kol Mandaskin V'al Raita Divatra Hadeim V'chol Atar V'atar Yehelohon Ulchon Shlomo Rabba China V'chista V'rachamem Chayina Rechinum Z'nei R'vichei V'kanim Min Kadam Oruhun V'yishmaya V'yimru Amen Shlomo Rabba Min Shmaya V'chayim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'yimru Amen Yoseh Shalom V'yimru V'yaseh B'rachamav Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'yimru Amen. Thank you all for coming. It means a great deal to us. You're all invited for brunch.